Welcome back to our video tutorial series on creating pivot tables. We're going to start simple, and we're going to start by using, again, our sample data file from earlier. And the very first step is to just click anywhere inside the range of data that you intend to use. And up on the Home tab, you'll want to make sure from Home you go over to Insert, and then on my version of Excel, it's the first version on the top left, Pivot Table. And you'll notice this box pops up and it's going to ask you to select a table or a range. Now, since we've already defined our data as a table and formatted it as a table before, we've got that easy visual reference from the name that we created earlier to translate into the range of data we wanted. That name in this case was source data, so we know it's grabbing the right range of data. But you can always double check that by just scanning left to right and top to bottom. You can see those dotted lines are enclosing the range of data that I wanted, but in this case we've already predetermined that. I will also note that you can always redefine the range of data that you want. If you were to click inside here, and you could click and drag the range of specific data within your table that you wanted. The other thing you can do is create a new table and redefine that range as well. Again, you can create another name for it, so you've got that easy visual reference in the future. But in this case, we're going to stick to the original method. So again, let's bring up that box again, and you'll see the next thing that it asks me for is where do I want the pivot table to be placed, either in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. So if you have a small range of data and you perhaps want to drop the pivot table right next to that range of data on the same worksheet, you could do that by clicking existing worksheet. And then when you click on the location box here, you would just want to click on the cell where you want to drop the pivot table to start it. But since we have a rather large data set, we're going to stick to the new worksheet option. So if we use that and we click OK, you'll see a new worksheet pops up, and we've got the makings of our pivot table now. So notice over on the right, we have the pivot table fields area. And you'll see, first of all, in the top section here, you've got all of your variable names, and these correspond to the headers in your columns, which is why, again, it's really important to make sure that you have your headers named appropriately and formatted appropriately so that they show up here. Also notice the 4 quadrants in the bottom right. We have filters, columns, rows, and values. This is really where the magic starts to happen, as you'll see in a moment. Now, if you've ever worked with any other data analysis software, perhaps something like SPSS or SAS, pivot tables will essentially produce a cross-tabulation of data that you can perform perhaps in a more sophisticated way in those software packages. But here you're essentially summarizing data in a cross-tabular format. So let's say, for example, that you're interested in understanding how many children were in each setting by age group. One of the very first things to do from here as a best practice is to right-click on the sheet name and rename it. You'll see in this case, Excel defaulted to a title of Sheet 1, which isn't very descriptive and in the end isn't helpful for knowing what's on that sheet if you create multiple sheets, which you tend to do when you're creating multiple pivot tables. So we're going to right-click and click on Rename. And in this case, we're going to label it Setting by Age. Okay, so from here, let's begin adding our fields to the 4 quadrants in the bottom right. So for columns, we're going to click and drag on setting. For rows, we're going to use child age as of October 1, 2017. For filters, we're going to use race and ethnicity. And for values, we're going to use setting. Now notice what I'm doing. I clicked and drag into the specific quadrant I want. It's that easy. And as you might have gathered by now, the term pivot table and pivoting really refers to the ability to move variables in and out of this area. So I can just as easily remove something from one of the quadrants by clicking and dragging that over. So I'm going to put that back in. Now, if you wanted to use a filter, which in this case we have added one, you can click on the drop-down menu toward the top left, And you'll see the list of all of the different races and ethnicities have dropped into our view here. And let's say, for example, I wanted to filter the data only on children who identify as Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. So we click and highlight that and press OK. And you'll see the data have winnowed down to just the 193 children who were in that group. You can also go back here and select multiple items, and all of the options become checkboxes. So this essentially can become a multi-select. But for now, let's keep all of them checked, and we'll go back to our original view. One little trick here, if you ever wanted to duplicate a pivot table, all you have to do is click and drag to cover the entirety of the pivot table. Make sure you're including all of the rows and columns, including the filter or filters at the top. And you'll hit Control C or whatever your copy shortcut is on your keyboard. And then you can paste it in. And there we have another pivot table with the same starting settings, but I can move out perhaps setting from the values in columns, and maybe I want to drop in gender instead. So I could compare those together. But for the sake of our demonstration here, I'm going to back that out and get back to our original table. So there you have it. Without a whole lot of extra work, we've created our very first pivot table. Congratulations.